All right. So thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Kate Blair. I am the Executive Director of Savannah Chatham CASA for 2 years today. Today's my 2-year anniversary as Executive Director. And I'd love to introduce Jennifer Graham. Jennifer is our Communications and Development Manager. And Jennifer, you want to tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I am new to the team. This is my first month with CASA, but I work to educate and bring awareness to the community about what we do and fundraise. So, recruiting volunteers and encouraging people to donate. That's pretty much what I do in my communications and development position. So, I'm really happy that you all are here because that makes my job easier.
Thank you. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Can everybody can see my screen, right? Let's hope.
Yes.
Let's hope you also can hear. We're going to start with the video because I love this video. It's done by another CASA, but it really captures the role of a CASA very well. Now, full disclosure, I have 2 teenagers, 13-year-olds that are on video game systems right now. So let's hope they're not hoarding my internet and that this works well. And you can hear it.
Growing up is tough for a kid. They have school and homework, practices and games, there are doctor's appointments and detention halls. The making friends and the keeping friends, discovering who they are and who they aren't, there's so much to learn. There's this whole world out there, right here. These times are transforming in someone's story, and they can really be quite chaotic. That chaos of being a child only increases when abuse and neglect fill their home. The normal winds of chaos are now a storm, and sometimes, when the storm is so great, a child must be removed from their home. And this is a really tough day. It's complicated, and it's painful. When a child is removed from their home because of abuse or neglect, they leave their normal and they enter foster care. The court sends them to a new place, a new home, often to a new school with new people, new everything. And all of these new things aim at a better life for the child. They aim to help in the healing process for the family. But it's still tough. They still have the school activities, the doctor's appointments, and the lessons to learn. But now court dates, visits with parents, and check-ins with social workers quickly bombard the calendar. And there's the pain of separation from what they know and where they feel comfortable. There are hundreds of children in our city who experience chaotic days like this, weeks like this, years like this. And these days, weeks, and years are difficult. They're exhausting and isolating. They're really tough. But there are ways to help. Ways to bear the burdens the child is carrying. Ways to make the days less tough. These children need to feel more supported. They need someone constant who is on their team. Someone who is fighting for their best amidst all the shuffle. And a CASA volunteer provides this help. A court-appointed special advocate helps bear these burdens. They are the constant amidst the chaos. In the middle of all the shuffle and uncertainty, they know the child. There are still tough days, but now there's someone standing up for the child day in, day out. Someone who knows both the biological and foster parents. Someone who meets with the teachers, doctors, and social workers to ensure the child's needs are being met. Someone who speaks for the child's best interest in court. Someone who the judge counts on for insight. Someone who cares about the child and just lets them be a kid. Someone who is there for the tough days, the great days, and the in-between days. This someone is so important. This someone is a CASA volunteer. And there are hundreds of children in our city waiting for a CASA volunteer. They're waiting for someone to speak up for them. They're waiting for someone to help weather the storm. Each child in foster care needs this support, this someone to count on. Be this someone for a child in foster care. Be their advocate. Be a powerful voice for their best interest. Be a CASA volunteer.
So I think that's a really great overview of what CASA is for a child. As every child that we work with has experienced abuse or neglect. Currently, there are around 374, last time I pulled this, which was just a couple weeks ago, children in foster care. We are currently serving 76% of them. So we are looking to fill our class in January with potential volunteers to help us reach next year. For our 30th anniversary as an organization, 100% of children served. And so we hope that you can help us reach that goal, because we believe that every child deserves to have a CASA. Now, a CASA, well, this first I want to tell this quote is one of my favorite, because I find it so true, and in why our community, and particularly our judges, really invest in CASA and believe in CASA, is because there's no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. And the children we work with are the most vulnerable. Again, they've all experienced abuse or neglect. Often they don't have a steady adult in their life that is looking out for their best interest. And so CASA really fulfills that. So CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. These are community volunteers such as yourself that can go through training, and then they are appointed by a judge, and your job is to advocate for the best interest of the child who experienced abuse or neglect. So most of the children, the largest portion of the children we serve, are children in the foster care system. So that means they have a dependency case with DFACS. They are under the custody of the state, and they have a attorney appointed to them. They have a case manager through Department of Family Children Services, and then they also have a guardian ad litem appointed to them. So often that guardian ad litem, and a guardian ad litem can be an attorney, but under the under the federal laws and state laws, it can be a community volunteer. And that's what makes CASA so amazing, is that we have these community volunteers that are trained to advocate for the best interest of the child. So you have one case, which may be one child or a sibling group that you're advocating for, as opposed to when there is not a CASA volunteer around for a child, that we don't have enough to be appointed, then it is an attorney who often has 30 or 40 different cases. So we are different than a case manager, and Laquana can probably talk a little bit about that, given her experience as working with DFACS. We're different than a case manager, again, because we're community volunteers. We don't have the power to put any services into place or anything like that. Our only power is to provide recommendations to the court for the court to decide what needs to be done for that child. So we are the eyes and ears that make sure all of the needs of the child are met. We work very closely with the Department of Family Children Services and the assigned caseworker, but unfortunately the case managers at DFACS are often incredibly overburdened with 30 or 40 cases. Attorneys typically have even higher caseloads, so it can be very difficult for them to ensure that every single need is met. We at CASA work to find where those missing pieces are and bring them attention to the players and ensure that the child's needs are met. So how we do that? Well, we spend time monthly with the child or children that we're assigned to. Because we are appointed by the court, we have all access to the children's records. That means we can go to medical offices, we can go to DFACS, we can go to the school, we can go to anywhere and ask for records, showing our court appointment, and receive all those records. And often that's how we help DFACS a lot, because the case managers have a very large caseload, and we can assist in getting those medical records and helping to ensure that the child's needs are met. We speak with teachers, family members, counselors, caseworkers, everybody that touches this child's life, we speak with them. We evaluate every single area of the children's life to ensure that everything is being met, in the same way that if you have children of your own, you would advocate and make sure everything is being met. Sometimes in the school system, that means ensuring that they have an IEP in place, an individualized educational plan. If they have some level of special needs, making sure that that's be respected by the school. If they get suspended or expelled, a CASA worker should be there fighting to make sure the child still gets the education they deserve, and that they get all of their needs met in that way. It's a model that works. Children that have a CASA are twice as likely to find a safe and permanent home, because in the end, our goal is to move the child out of foster care as quickly as possible, safely as possible, in the best way as possible, but to find a safe and permanent home. They're half as likely to re-enter foster care because we get it right the first time. It's those extra eyes and ears, right, that help ensure that it's the right decision made. They're more likely to succeed in school because somebody's watching and paying attention, and they receive more services for their family as a whole. And I say that because more than 50% of the children we serve that are in foster care do return home to their families. For a multitude of reasons, children come into foster care. There's this idea that foster care is mainly for children that have experienced substantial physical or sexual abuse. The largest portion of our children are in foster care because of neglect. And neglect happens because of a multitude of reasons. Often it's substance abuse disorders. So if a family member, parent is struggling with substance use and they are unable to care for their child, we see often mental health concerns. Both of those things can be treated and addressed so that a child can return home to a safe family. It takes time, it takes a lot of resources and a lot of effort, but that is always in the best interest of the child, for the child to return home to their biological family if those issues are addressed. And then the other thing we see, the intersection of pretty much everything, is poverty, right? If a family is homeless and they aren't able to meet the needs of their child, a child may come into care. And so making sure we really, really work to make sure that poverty is never a reason that a child is in foster care, because that's just not a good reason for a child to be in foster care. We should address the issues of poverty. And the other thing a CASA does often is it makes sure that a child has fewer out-of-home placements. So it is a traumatic experience for a child to enter foster care. They're obviously experiencing trauma wherever they are, and that's the reason they're coming into foster care. And now, as you saw in that video, they're into a whole new area, living with new people. Often, sometimes they're placed with family or in their own community, but they're adjusting to a whole new set of norms, and that can be incredibly traumatic. If that child stays in that foster home, is a good foster home where all their needs are met, we will not further traumatize that child. But every time that placement is disrupted, and Ms. Mary can tell you a thing or two about disrupted placements because she saw a lot of that firsthand. If they're disrupted, we cause more trauma and harm to that child. And sometimes that means being that voice in that courtroom saying, we do not need to move this child. What do we need to address the needs of this child so that this child is not moved? Our children, as you could imagine, are highly traumatized and they act out. Their behavior is not easy often, and that can disrupt a placement. But if we can put services in place and ensure that the child remains in that home with additional services, we won't further traumatize the child and then cause more behavioral issues. CASA so we're an organization that receives government funding, but we also, about half of our funding is government, half of it is not, through fundraising efforts that Jennifer has to figure out and make sure we have. But what makes sense about CASA is that our 1 year of CASA, because it's a model that works with volunteers, 1 year of a CASA advocacy costs less than 1 month of foster care. So it makes sense for our taxpayers and for our government, right, to invest in this model, because if you can reduce the time a child spends in care, we're costing less money to the state, and we're ensuring that a child, and more than importantly than anything else, ensuring that a child is not further traumatized. All right, so a CASA volunteer, so as I said, like where the rubber meets the road is in the courtroom, right? That is where your ideas and what you believe is best for this child is heard. So often people think that DFACS, Department of Family Children Services, is the agency that removes a child from its home. They are not. They're the agency that makes the case for why the child should be removed. It is always the judge's decision. And then it's the judge's decision whether they stay in care or whether they return home. And so there's one judge who doesn't get to see all of this child's life, and they've got to make this incredibly tough decision based on the information that is presented to them by attorneys and by DFACS and the CASA. What makes CASA different than attorneys is that a child's attorney's job is to advocate for what the child wants, right? If you hire an attorney, that attorney's job is to make sure that you get what you want, right? a CASA or guardian ad litem's job is to make sure that the child's best interests are served. If anybody has been a parent before, you know that what a child wants, or an auntie or a grandma or whatever, you know what a child wants is different than what a child necessarily needs. And so our job is to go in front of the court and tell them that. We have 3 judges, 2 have just changed over, but we've always had incredibly supportive judges, because our CASA program is only as good as the judges that appoint us. And our judges believe very deeply in the CASA model. And they say more often than not that it's the CASA report, it's the information provided to them by the CASA that gives them the best insight into the child's life. So that they can make those best decisions. Now, it's kind of scary when I say, well, you're going to go in front of a judge and maybe you've never been in a courtroom, or maybe, you know, that's kind of sounds scary. And you're like, I don't know that much about the legal system. I haven't started law school yet, you know, or, you know, you have a lot of questions about that. Looks like we train you. Boy, do we train you. So our pre-service training is 30 hours. So typically it is in person, but in COVID times, it is via Zoom. And given the COVID numbers right now, we don't anticipate that changing in January. So 15 hours are via Zoom, just like we're all talking here tonight. It'll be Tuesday nights from 5 to 8, Tuesday evenings from 5 to 8 for 6 weeks. And that's where you do your in-class. In addition to that, you have online work. So if you've ever taken an online class, or maybe you've kind of seen group chats or things of that nature, it's similar to that. So you have about another 15 hours of online work that you do alongside of that. And that's 30 hours. Then in addition, we ask that you do 10 hours of virtual courtroom observation. So normally that would be you go in person, and we are getting more of an option to go in person if it's 1 or 2 people here and there. So if that much virtual is scaring you, we do have some other options to, at least for the courtroom observation. And you go and observe what court looks like. And so you go to see how a CASA volunteer is advocating. To me, that is the best part that really informs your training, because everything you hear in training, you see happen. So it's 40 full hours of training within 6 weeks. It's intensive. And it's designed that way because being a CASA volunteer, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen sharing for a second. So being a CASA volunteer is it's not a go stock the shelves at a food bank kind of a volunteer opportunity. It is more rewarding in that you get to directly see how you impact a child's life. You work with that one child or sibling group. You get to know them. You get to know what they want. You get to know their family situation. You become a detective, right? You're looking for different ways that different family members, everybody's telling you different sides of a different story, because life is messy and it's not black and white. So you're shifting through all of that and then making recommendations based on the research that you've done and the discussions that you've had. And so it is much more intensive in that way. But then you get to see firsthand that a child's life has changed. And then Miss Mary's on here. I'm going to tell your story if you don't mind. So Mary had a little girl that came into foster care directly out of the hospital. She was born with drugs in her system. Mom was an unrehabilitated substance use with substance use disorder, and was not willing to work. There's several programs that you can work, but she was not willing at that time to work it. The father was pretty much out of the picture, and felt that it was probably best for her to be adopted. And he thought that was the direction it was going. This little girl, sweet as could be, isn't she, Miss Mary? She was just the sweetest little thing. I still remember she came to the office, and she, because of her issues, because of being born with drugs in her system, she had a lot of behavioral issues. She was in an adoptive home, but that disrupted. She went into believe at least 4 different foster homes in her little 4 years of life, bouncing from foster home to foster home. And am I right, Mary?
Yes, it was traumatic.
And she kept bouncing, but go ahead.
7 different foster homes.
Oh, it was 7?
Mhm.
Wow.
Altogether.
Wow.
I mean, that was including just the respite homes, but yeah, she was bounced around a lot.
And
And she is a beautiful child, beautiful. And I just love her. You grow to love these children.
yeah, and and so they were always kept looking for adoptive homes and they kept being disrupted. But the father then hearing that her placements kept being disrupted and Mary keeping a communication with him. And while at first he didn't seem like the best fit, he really addressed his issues, got stable housing, and did everything he could. And Mary was the voice of reason telling the courts, we really should consider father again. We should really look to reunite him. And during COVID, this little girl went on her very first plane ride and went to Pennsylvania with her father and sibling. And now, Mary, they still keep in contact with you, right?
Yes, I hear from him about every 2 weeks. And sometimes that's just too long. I have to call and see her. But he's so good about that. He sends pictures. He lets me talk to, he's got a little boy too. I talked to both the children, and it just, this was just an awesome way for this to end for us in Savannah. But it's a new beginning for all of them.
Yes, yes. My favorite picture is the one that I saw Mary with her puppy, with her dog. That
Oh, that's on my screensaver. Love it.
and so Mary, since typically, so this her case ended in reunification, and so she's no longer the CASA on that case, but she built such a relationship with that family that they continue to stay in touch, and it's absolutely wonderful. And that's, and then there's other cases where, I'm personally like Stephanie, I'm also an adoptive mom, and I very much believe that adoption is a beautiful thing, but it comes out of loss. And it is a thing that a child has a lot of questions and a lot of struggles. And if they're in a family that looks different than them and with different lived experiences, it comes with all different kinds of things. So we as an organization always prioritize reunification or family adoption or guardianship to save those familial bonds whenever possible. But sometimes that's not possible, and sometimes that's not in the child's best interest. And when it's not, we're also the people voicing that the parental rights need to be terminated and we need to move on and get this child permanency. And not, we believe in giving people lots of chances, but we don't believe in a child growing up in foster homes while a parent is unable to address the issues that they need to address. It can be a heart-wrenching experience as a CASA volunteer, but it is, again, the most rewarding experience you would have. When you're in court, you hear case after case of different experiences because you're popping into different cases and hearing different things. When you have a case, you'll go to court for your case. And that will be the case you'll become intimately involved with and know. But you will also always, always, always have a CASA staff member. You have a coordinator that's assigned to you, and that staff member will walk you through everything and ensure that you have everything that you need. They have all the connections to all of the major players, and they attend court with you, because I know it can be intimidating to go to court. You might not know how to address the judge or what to say or how to say when you occasionally get sworn in on a stand. That can be nerve-wracking. You have a staff member that is right beside you and coaching you through everything. So let me see, make sure I covered. So the one question people ask the most is how many hours, like what is the commitment like to be a CASA volunteer? Because it is a lot. What I've said, the training up front is 40 hours, as I said, that you complete within 6 or 7 weeks. Then when you get your first case, it can be a little more labor intensive at first, because that's when you're getting to know all the players, you're finding everybody and you're talking to people. So it could be maybe that first month could be maybe 20 hours or 15 to 20 hours spent in that month. But typically we say you spend about 10 to 15 hours a month working on your CASA case. You spend an hour, we ask you that you visit with the child an hour each month. Right now, most of that is virtual. Some are doing social distance visits. no case managers are doing visits right now unless it's an emergency. So we as CASA, since we only have one child each, are asking our volunteers if they feel comfortable to do social distance visiting so we can get our eyes on the children. So we ask that you visit with the child once a month. Our biggest issue that we have is what we really, really need are volunteers willing to travel. So as of the almost 400 children in foster care, could be almost half of them are placed throughout the state. There are not enough foster homes in Chatham County. So I'm going to say right now, if you want to be a foster parent, stop, just go ahead and hang up right now and go be a foster parent, because we need foster parents more than anything. You can email us. We can connect you with all the right people and places. That's what we need. We also, though, understand that that's a little bit larger of a commitment than being a CASA volunteer. So this can be a great place to start. And so because our children are placed throughout the state, we need CASA volunteers that are willing to travel. So if you have family or you travel regularly for business to different parts of the state, when you do your interview and you start your process, we encourage you to tell us that, so that if children are placed in those areas, we can assign you, because you're going to be more than likely to go visit that child if you're traveling there regularly. If you're just willing to travel, maybe you're retired and you have time on your hands and you're willing to travel more, we really, really need that. A lot of our teenagers get placed across the state, or those children that have special needs, because there's not as many therapeutic homes. If you have a child that's placed outside with 2 hours or more away, you're only required to physically visit the child once every quarter. So you don't have to travel. You would travel at least 4 times a year. And then we do a background screening of us. Obviously, you're working with children. So you will, we do a complete fingerprinting, background screenings, criminal background checks. The only things we're looking for is anything that relates to children. If you have anything on your background or any negative intersections with the child welfare system that would prevent you from becoming a CASA volunteer. It's also a minimum age of 21. I'm not sure why, but that's just the CASA requires you have to be 21 to do it. And then what happens after this, we will send an email that will link you to our website. You can find our application. Some of you may have already filled that out. If you fill out the application, you'll be set up for an interview with a staff member who will talk through. It's an interview in that it's just as much as you talking more to us and learning if this is the right fit for you, because it is a commitment. We ask every CASA volunteer to come on for a 1 year, at least 1 year, that you're committing to 1 year of service. These children, because our case managers and our attorneys are so overburdened, they often have people entering and exiting their lives often. We don't want a CASA volunteer to be another person that's exiting their life. So we ask that you, when you're assigned to a case, you stay with that case. So the child has that one constant. Our case managers at DFACS, often new case managers especially, often rely on us to provide that historical information that they don't have because they weren't on the case from the beginning. And then when you complete the training, we all go before the judges and you are sworn in as a CASA volunteer. And if you are willing to travel and aren't very incredibly specific on what type of child that you want to be assigned to, you would probably end up with a case within a week, because we assign them very quickly. If you want maybe a baby, you're not as comfortable working with teenagers, or vice versa, or you're not willing to travel, you might wait a couple months before you're assigned a case. But that's pretty much that. And then once you are sworn in as a CASA volunteer, after you've completed 1 year, we ask that you do continuing ed, and we provide lots of wonderful continuing education opportunities that many take advantage of before even their first year, to learn more about the system and how to serve the children better. Jennifer, is there anything I'm forgetting before we open up for questions?
No, I think you covered most everything, from the training to what's to be expected. I went through the training, so I think you covered everything that they need to know for that. So no, I think that sounds good.
And I just want to mention, we do have we have a couple specialty courts. Our family treatment court is one that works with with parents that have substance use disorder, and it's a pretty intensive court. And so we do that CASA. If that's something that you're interested in, it requires a little bit more work. Then we also have a new one that's launching in January called Hope Court. It's for children that have been trafficked either commercially or sexually. Not all of those children are in foster care, but we are assigning CASA volunteers to all of those children. Right now, there's 8 or 9 that are in that court. All have been sexually trafficked, all females. Some aren't necessarily in foster care, but they're living with family. And so the judge has asked that we provide additional volunteers to be that extra person. So if that is something that kind of speaks to your heart, please let us know. Often, though, those young women are placed in different counties out of safety to get them away from the places that put them, the people that put them into those unsafe positions to begin with. So I wanted to put that out there. That's also another option in a new court that we're looking to find volunteers for in the next year. All right, so I think I said everything that let me just double check before yeah, okay. So I'm gonna stop the recording. Thank you to all that are watching the recording. So you all